let's zoom out from the UK and talk a bit about the Middle East and I guess the sort of unraveling or maybe the remaking of the world order, because we began, this time last year, we were lamenting the pogrom of October 7th. Things have shifted considerably since then. We see actually Israel winning the war against its enemies, against its Hamas, Hezbollah, or the other Iranian-backed stooges. Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about what's been going on there?
No, it has been really quite stunning. And it not only, I suppose, has been important for Israel and its security, but also seems to be reshaping the politics of the region in interesting ways. The fact that not only have they been able to degrade Hamas to a pretty significant degree, but also that the decapitation of the Hezbollah leadership was so significant, so broad sweeping. I mean, it's often, we kind of think about it as the kind of top commanders, but the kind of whole kind of middle kind of ranks of people who were, again, kind of executing Hezbollah actions on a day-to-day basis through that pager stunt, through all these different things. They've just been so significantly pared back. And that obviously is one of the things that was so significant in sparking the unravelling of the Assad regime, and also the increasing kind of unravelling of Iranian imperial sort of activities in that part of the world. So that's been really striking. What has also, of course, been striking is as these victories against Islamist barbarism in various different forms are being chalked up by Israel as it defends itself, there's also been this faltering Western support. I mean, we have a government currently in the UK which nominally supports Israel and its right to defend itself, but has openly said that it would arrest its prime minister if he ever touched down in the country because of the International Criminal Court arrest warrants which had been issued. So it's a stark contrast, I think, in terms of what has been going on the ground in Israel and what the way in which it's made almost the Western political class nervous rather than something which is seen as a potentially positive development.
I think the situation is very interesting, particularly when you look at just how anti-Semitism seems to have been normalized now. I remember thinking 3 or 4 years ago that this anti-Semitism wasn't something that you ever saw. It wasn't something that, you'd get the occasional idiot on Twitter or on social media, but that was pretty much it. And then post-October 7th, you've just seen it just explode to the point where people who you thought were sane and rational are now just emboldened to say things that are openly anti-Semitic. And that's the thing that I found really worrying about this. I mean, look, there's lots of things, but it's just now that you can openly say that you have a hatred of Jewish people and Jews, and that now seems to be fine.
Yeah. Or as usually you try and hide it by saying you're criticizing Israel, but often, the real message is clear a lot of the time. Inaya?
Yeah, I think I would echo actually very much what Francis said, and I've been having these conversations with a lot of people that the over anti-Semitism that you see now, oftentimes it's dressed up as people would use the word Zionist or Zionism when they're clearly just talking about Jewish people. I mean, some of the incidents that you see, I think just quite recently, someone was shouting anti-Semitic things to Jewish children like outside of a school, and there was barely a societal response. If this was any other group, there would be complete outrage, rightly so, that we would think, how have we got to this point as a society? We need to do something about this. But if Jewish people experience this kinds of abuse, it is just viewed as fine. And we saw what was happening on a lot of American campuses. A lot of the things that were being said by many of those students, the sheer hypocrisy of a lot of those university establishments. I remember that there was the famous questioning where could you say that very overtly anti-Semitic things.
Oh, is it in Congress where there
exactly.
Various university presidents were asked, is it okay to advocate for genocide on campus?
And it was all about context all of a sudden when all of the conversations we've been having about free speech for years, they were completely morally absolute.
You can't say that, women don't have penises, but you can say
exactly.
Let's genocide the Jewish race.
And that we just saw that absolute hypocrisy across the board. And as Thomas said, the cowardice that we have seen in the equivocation amongst our political elites has been really quite striking. I mean, and many of them, it's really just what's politically expedient. They are facing challenges in many of their seats. I mean, Wes Streeting nearly lost his seat to a Gaza independent.
Yeah.
And that kind of constituency is increasingly prominent in the discourse, and the political elites lack the moral courage and clarity to take a clear stance at fear of alienating certain people.
And it seems that many of the, even in relation to the Middle East specifically, many of the fears that people might have had, some more justifiable than others, that the actions Israel has taken would lead to something truly terrible, to all-out war with Iran or whatever. That hasn't happened either. In fact, we've seen the weakening not only of, as you were saying, Tom, not only of Iran, but also Syria, one of its, key, or Syria being a key proxy of Iran, if that makes sense.
Of course, it would be wise not to make too many prognostications about what's going to happen in the Middle East, but it has been really interesting. And of course, the Syrian piece of this is so striking, the speed with which that regime collapsed, and also the speed with which Western policymakers suddenly were quite happy to say, in the form of HTS and Abu Mohammed al-Jilani, maybe this is an Islamist we can do business with, and potentially repeating the mistakes of many, many years before. Whilst that is obviously, you can see in terms of the outpouring of joy on the streets of Syria in response to the toppling of a deeply cruel, malicious, sadistic dictatorship that's still sort of fraught with peril as to where that particular country and where the region is now headed in the years ahead. So yeah, all these things are. You just wish we had a kind of political leadership, like David Lammy is our foreign secretary, as all of these things are going on. It does keep you up at night.
Yeah, not a man made for these dangerous and interesting times.
I mean, the situation in Syria is very interesting. I think one thing that people don't talk enough about actually is the fact that it helped to be propped up. It was propped up effectively by Russia.
Yes.
And Russia couldn't do as much as they used to be able to, because of the invasion of Ukraine. So I think one of the things, you shouldn't make predictions, number one. But number two is you never realize that when one thing happens, it can have all these unforeseen consequences 1, 2, or even 3 years down the line. Yeah. So at the moment, none of us knows what's going to happen with the situation in Syria, what the impact is going to be on Iran, Israel, or on the Middle East as a whole.
Yeah, it is just interesting, because as we're talking about, predictions and things, Donald Trump's presidency will be a very different era when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, when the Syrian regime was toppled, I think he tweeted, I don't want to, they don't like us anyway, either side, we don't want to get involved, and that's obviously a bit of a departure from what Americans are usually doing. I mean, obviously
Osama said let's get involved more.
Yeah, exactly. And the Trump administration is there's different moods in terms of Ukraine. They're a bit, some of them are more skeptical than others. Many of them are much more interested in what's going on in Taiwan and China. So I think that this new era of Trump will be a very different foreign policy engagement to what we've seen.
Yeah, and Tom, finally, I mean, it does. A lot of people were saying, as it looks as if the war in Ukraine might possibly be winding down. We don't know. There's talk of a potential peace agreement. They have to agree to it, of course. A lot of people will now be saying, well, what was the point of all that? Why did we back Ukraine for so long? Why did we allow the war to drag on? Isn't it all NATO's war anyway? What do you make of that kind of?
I think it's just worth remembering that, and worth pushing back on this very simplistic narrative that's spun about Ukraine, that the only reason they resisted the invasion of their country was because Joe Biden told them to, essentially, because Boris Johnson was dispatched to tell them not to make peace. All of these bizarre sort of theories which have curdled on sections of the supposedly anti-war, but it's basically become sort of anti-Ukraine sections of social media, are such nonsense. And also the idea that it was all for nothing. I mean, if you think about the position that Ukraine could have been in if they didn't fight back and weren't given support to do so, if that column of tanks running towards Kiev had been more successful, if there wasn't the liberation of Kherson and the Kharkiv offensive, which freed up so much land, which had previously been captured by the invaders, a lot of this has obviously put them in whilst it does seem like we're heading towards a kind of deeply unsatisfying, for all concerned, basically, sort of peace, and a very shaky one, no doubt, if that's what actually is finally achieved. The idea that it was all for nothing, or they haven't put themselves in a much better position because they had that brave fight back and that brave defense of their country, I think is for the birds, really. And it's this idea that they were only doing it, that it's this kind of phony divided country that was only standing up for themselves because they were being manipulated by their own oligarchs and pumped with American money, is obviously ridiculous if you talk to anyone from that country.